Audio testing, 1, 2, 3. Lights on, camera rolling, and action.
Welcome to the Scaling Creator Podcast, the one-stop shop that explores problems, solutions, and stories for business-minded creators. I'm Soren Dickens.
And I'm Erickson Dickens.
We'll be talking about everything from self-discovery, storytelling, leadership, marketing, sales, operations, and finance.
If you like a healthy dose of education mixed with a generous dash of insightful entertainment, prepare for your ears to be pleasured. Oh yeah.
Make sure to check us out at scalingcreator.com and also join our free Discord community.
Scaling Creator launching in 3, 2, 1.
The following content is not intended for all listeners, but we strongly encourage all listeners to listen regardless. All right, welcome back to the Scaling Creator Podcast. I'm here with Erickson Dickens, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the challenges we face as kids and how trauma impacts who you become as a creative.
So I think that's important to dive into that because when you peel people back, oftentimes you'll see that they have become who they have become based off the adversity that they have faced during their life. We thought it would only be appropriate if we got kind of vulnerable and talked about our own lives and what kind of shaped us and some of the stuff we went through throughout our lives that have impacted us. Because yeah, it's kind of funny actually. A lot of creatives, regardless of the realm that they're in, whether it's filmmaking or artistry, writing, whatever it might be, music, oftentimes a lot of creators, they have some dark shadows looming over them. They went through some hard times that kind of impacted them in a way. And, you'll hear that in songs, you'll see it in movies, movie directors. People oftentimes kind of channel their pain into their creativity. So yeah, we thought that this episode would explore that a little bit, kind of dissect it.
I would say that one of the things that most impacted me as a youngster and also now as a creative was understanding expectations and also the expectations that individuals had for me as a creative. So like earlier today, for example, I was having a conversation with Thor, a young man from Norway, and we were talking a lot about shadow work, exploring our shadow, exploring our insecurities, exploring our trauma. And as a creator, it's really important to explore your trauma because that's really where you're going to find most inspiration when it comes to connecting with a vulnerable audience. For myself and for Erickson here, I would say that our upbringing really cultivated who we became as creatives in terms of what expectations we had or what expectations were laid out in front of us as kids and as teenagers. I think looking back as a creator, and I think any creator that might be listening right now could also relate to this, but if you look back and you look at what expectations may have been laid out in front of you, you'd often find expectations that were likely not even your own. They're expectations that people or superiors may have had over you, whether that's your parents or it may have been teachers or administrators at schools. They had these expectations of you that fell into this narrative that really cultivated a narrative that was for them or that made them feel secure. And oftentimes we fall into that trap. And I think that that's a conversation that we should have.
Yeah, those are good points. I mean, definitely should start with that, more of the first world problem thing. It's hard to talk about those kind of things and then picture challenges in like other countries and stuff and what they're going through and the stuff that they face on a daily basis. I mean, we have it completely made in every possible way compared to a lot of people, but in our scope, what we've experienced, and I know other people can relate. Yeah, what you said, it's like having those expectations as a kid placed on you very, very aggressively in a lot of ways. I mean, I know from our experience, we were bred and built to succeed. There wasn't an option. It's like, you will succeed. You will be getting an A in every one of your classes. You will be doing this, you will be doing that. And looking back on it, I know that was done, for a big reason why that was done.
It was done out of love.
It was done out of love. It was done to make us killers in a good way, bred to succeed. But looking back on it, obviously, now that we're older and we can reflect on it, it's like, was it really a way to cultivate our growth in a way? Or was it just because this is how it should be done, therefore you do it? So looking back on that, I mean, just for example, it's like, I would cry if I didn't get an A on a test. I get so nervous before a math test when I was 10 years old, because if you didn't get an A, what are you doing? Something's off here. We're gonna fix this. And I remember my whole day would be ruined if I knew I had a math test coming up, I would get so sick in my stomach because of the anxiety. That's not the healthiest thing. But that's just one example. I mean, what's an example on your end of just kind of the expectation thing?
I think being raised in a dynamic where expectations were set so high for your success output really created an environment where you figured out how to win regardless of what you did to win. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that, and I'm going to like break some social constructs here, but as a creative, at a certain point,
ways to win.
You will find creative ways to win.
Yeah.
And so if we're talking about my upbringing when it comes to swimming, there were always ethical ways to approach winning swimming. So it was not that you were forced to win, but it was almost like, hey, you should win, so figure out a way to win, which means you will put in the work to work harder than everyone else, and then therefore you will win. And then as you get older, you start to get in your own head and you start to lose, not because you may not be better than them, but probably because you're in your own head about having this like expectation to win, and therefore you lose. So that's something that we likely experience the same thing. And then when it comes to school, it's like, yo, you need to get an A on this test. You need to win. You need to get an A in this class. And so, of course, any young kid is going to figure out a solution to winning, which is not going to be ethical all the time. And a lot of the times, what that comes down to is cheating on homework, getting the answer key to the test, cheating on the test, and therefore you win. And then by society standards, you've won, but what did you really do?
Or what did you learn?
What did you learn in the process? You learn how to cheat. I think expectations are one of those things where someone once told me, they're like, if you have expectations, you're setting a date for failure. If you have expectations, you're setting a date for disappointment.
Right.
And expectations they're good to a certain extent, but I really can't wrap my head around it, man. I really can't. I feel like expectations are one of those things where you know what you want, you know what you can achieve, but the universe isn't always out there for you in terms of like achieving that goal.
Right. And that can really mess you up later in life if
you
set your expectations, or you have somebody set certain expectations upon you.
I think that's the biggest piece that you just said is somebody else. I'm going to repeat that. Somebody else setting your expectations for you. That might be a parent, that might be a friend, that might be a grandparent or a girlfriend or boyfriend. But when you have someone else set your expectations, you've literally just like put a halt in the universe and said, let me allow someone else into my realm and take control of my life.
Yeah, it restricts your autonomy on a very fundamental level. And then before you know it, you're sacrificing your authenticity, your true self. And then that can carry on for years. And one day you wake up and you're like, who was I all these years? Because I never really kind of did my own thing. I never really pursued my own passion because this was always like the expectation that was placed on me. And that can really mess people up. I mean, you hear it all the time. You hear people who, they're in med school or something because that's what just was expected of them their whole life. And in reality, they're miserable. They might be on a career path to set them up later in life for financial success, prestige, but deep down, they are not happy people. They're not happy doing what they're doing. And that's unfortunate because that gets bred into you at a young age in a lot of circumstances.
I think a lot of the times too, what's really important is understanding that expectations can always be met with some type of catastrophic halt. And whenever that happens, I just laugh. I sit back and laugh. And like, you have to, because when you have expectations, and like from my perspective, and likely from yours, when I was a kid, I was young, 8, 9 years old. I sat around always thinking about, I'm going to have a family and it's going to be me, Erickson, my mom and my dad. I'm going to have kids. They're going to be running around at the ranch and we're going to be riding quads and playing in the pond and all this. Looking back on it, it's really just a bunch of none of it's real. It's my expectations. And then when you step forward and you experience what actually is dealt to you in life, you realize that none of that is possible. The only thing that might be possible is me, Erickson, and mom hanging out at the house, wishing that dad was still around, understanding that there probably won't be kids because I don't want kids. Second, I don't know if you want kids, but there ain't going to be us playing with quads, and sure as there isn't a pond because there's a drought in California.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and that goes into the whole concept of like you have those kind of preconceived visions of what life can be, but then when life throws you a curveball very quickly, those thoughts can change. And we definitely experienced that. I know a lot of other people have experienced that in one way, shape, or form, but at that point you kind of have to, yeah, you have to adapt. And if you don't adapt, then you're going to be stuck with this vision that's impossible to achieve based on the cards that were kind of dealt to you and the way you kind of encountered that. But yeah, I mean, I think the elephant in the room with us is like dad dying. I mean, that was life altering, to say the least. We can talk all we want about the expectations placed on us and all that. And that, yeah, that, came with repercussions and pros and cons. But I mean, the real elephant in the room is just like so much of why we become the way we've become in a lot of different avenues in our life is because we watched our dad die for 18 months, not just die, but rot. And he looked like he became a zombie, and he died. I just turned 14. You were 12, right? So those are two of the most like vulnerable years in somebody's development to experience like a traumatic event. Like looking back on that, it's just like when you're in it and you're that young, you don't really quite realize, holy this is actually happening, because it's all kind of a blur. It's kind of a shock. And it's not until later in life where you start kind of connecting the dots of, wow, like I can trace this behavior way back then to this part. Oh, that's when dad was dying. Or I can trace this consequence of this certain behavior I took after that happened back then. It's crazy how things kind of catch up to you. But what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think that a lot of it comes back to the whole point of expectations, right? You're looking at the way you think that things are going to evolve. And when you take into consideration the adversity that life may throw at you, you come across these events which are completely catastrophic to your expectations. So when someone comes to me now with expectations, I look at them and I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But everything that I put into my own like desire path, I'm going to make happen. Not only because I want it to happen, but because I take into consideration the fact that if I have an expectation for something to happen, I already anticipate life throwing a fat curveball at you, where it's like, this is going to step in the way of your path of making that happen, and it's going to completely crush you. And in terms of what we experienced with dad getting sick, I remember it to the day. Like looking back on it, we were driving back from Tahoe in a storm, and dad was having headaches, and it was blistering storm. We were coming back from Tahoe. We had just spent the New Year's up there with the aughts. Dad was having headaches, and he was just, in a lot of pain. And then the fast forward 2 days, and we were at Bubba's house. We were at Bubba and Grandpa's house, and then what we were experiencing was mom and dad were actually getting an MRI in the city, and they were in San Francisco getting an MRI, and we didn't really know what was happening, but dad was having headaches. And this was all just so foreign to me because you're a young kid. And, when you get a headache as a young kid, it's probably because you were like dehydrated or you like tired or something. So you don't really quite understand that. And then, you're at your grandparents' house, and next thing you know, your parents come home from the city and you find out your dad has brain cancer. And when you hear cancer as a kid, you're pretty much, in line with death.
Yeah, especially brain cancer.
Yeah.
I mean, the cancer he got, glioblastoma, I think it was stage 4. Yeah, that's a death sentence. And my mom, our mom, I remember mom did a pretty good job of, like, we didn't know how severe it really was. So we knew it was bad, but as kids, we thought there was still a little bit of hope and whatnot. We weren't told straight up, this is probably life ending. Yeah, I just remember that time period. I think the whole time span from start to finish was 18 months, I want to say. But to your point, I remember just the world all of a sudden became very unstable and unpredictable. All those kind of illusions of this is definitely going to happen and we're going to have this in the future. Very quickly did we realize that was on very shaky ground, and it's just things became very unpredictable. We were passed around. I remember like when dad was having to go to the hospitals and he was kind of declining and he was having to stay over. We were getting passed around to different family members, different friends, and everything we knew up until that point, like a very stable household that we had, 2 parents, you and me, we had a very stable household, and all of a sudden it was just like that, gone.
Right.
You know, like all of a sudden we're like, wait, what the hell is even going on? So as like a kid, when you experience that type of trauma, not only does it kind of rewire your brain at that level, it makes you see kind of life in a very different way going forward. What did you cling on to, I guess? Because I know what I kind of did to kind of cope with all that, but in terms of like what you kind of clung on to during that time period, swimming?
Yeah, I would say swimming. I would say that it brings us back to the conversation of expectations, because when you're a young kid, you feel like you're expected to do something, and regardless of what is thrown at your path, or regardless of what is thrown at you, you're going to continue to excel toward your expectations. And for me, and I remember this clear as day, like literally the day that dad died, I'm pretty sure it was either the same day or the next day, mom drove me to swim practice. And it's because I didn't know what else to do. Like I was in this repetitive, let me escape from reality cycle, which told me, hey, go to swim practice. That's what you know is 100% going to be there.
Yeah.
And when it came to like coping with it, I would say that it was really just finding myself closest back to what I would call normal.
Yeah, like what you knew.
What I knew.
Right.
If I look back on my swimming career, the 3 years after dad passed away, I had the best swimming career in my life. Because all I could think about was like going to swim practice and focusing on swimming. I didn't want to think about family. I didn't want to think about future. I didn't think about anything other than swimming, and then ended up having the best swimming career, like the best outcome of my swimming career ever. And why? Because I channeled all of that emotion, channeled all that grief, channeled all of that into something else, which was ultimately an outlet for me. And, you know, long story short, I thought that that was going to be the escape, but that's not how the universe works. The universe threw us another fucking curveball, and next thing you know, mom got cancer, and you're dealing with that, and you're like, wait a second, dad just died. Now mom has cancer.
Yeah, it's kind of a double whammy on that one. I remember that. Like, I think I was a sophomore in high school. You know, I remember she was like crying, and she was like, "Yeah, guys, sit down or whatever," and told us that she had cancer too, and she had to, you know, she did the whole thing dad did. Like she had chemotherapy, radiation, the whole 9 yards. She lost all of her hair, and she ended up getting a double mastectomy, I remember, and just seeing her go through that. I mean, I think that was like a year time span, I want to say.
Yeah, it was
about
a couple
a year.
years, 2 years total.
You know, just seeing her in such a feeble state, especially after what we had just went through with dad. I mean, that was a 1.5 year long experience, and her having to do everything she did to keep the family together when that was going on, and dealing with that trauma and that stress. And then less than a year after he died, seeing her get sick, it's just like, at that point, it's just like, yeah, expectations gone. We're trying to survive at this point. We're going to do what we can to survive and get through the day. Life is unpredictable, and you're foolish to see if you can or to think that you can control the outcomes of certain things, because life's too unpredictable for that. And I got really offended, when I was younger, when I'd hear everybody always say, it's just part of the plan. Right. It happens for a reason. It's all happening for a reason. I was like, so my dad just rotted for 18 months, died. What's the reason? Oh, my mom just got sick right after that, in her bed for about a year. Can't stop crying. What's the reason? I didn't like that. I never liked when people would say that. They thought it would be a comforting thing, and I don't hold any spite towards them, because, you know, that's just their way of trying to tell us that things are going to be okay and there's a reason. But I just, you know, it's kind of a cop-out in a way. That always kind of bothered me. But yeah, I mean, that was 4 years of pure trauma, if you think about it, looking back on it. And I think for me, like you said, was swimming. That was like your coping mechanism, your outlet. For me, it was baseball, you know, and I didn't have dad anymore, because dad was associated with baseball. He was like my lifelong coach, but I still had baseball. And so that was like my way of coping. That's what I did. That's what I continued doing, because I didn't really know what else. And looking back on that, like you putting your heart and soul in swimming after that, and then me doing baseball, dealing with the curveballs that we were getting thrown at us. I think it's like on one end of the spectrum, it's good, and it's important to have outlets like that to keep you busy, you know, keep you moving towards your building momentum. But then at the same time, if it becomes too much of a distraction, what ends up happening is you kind of negate doing the deeper work, you know, actually processing that actually, grieving. That's something that we really didn't do a whole lot when we were kids. We didn't see a therapist. We didn't have any like mushy gushy talks with people. We didn't do any of that. We just kind of channeled it through what we did, school, sports, etc. And at least for me, I definitely kind of went inward with a lot of that stuff. I just didn't really talk to many people about it. I just kind of carried on. So that was definitely a consequence, a con that came out of that whole thing. I mean, it was everything that came out of it was a con, let's be real here. But going inward with like feelings and emotions and not kind of learning at that age to express them or be more vulnerable just because you kind of feel like you have to be strong. You have to maintain that face, maintain that image. I don't know, what was like a consequence that you kind of really felt that lingered on or came to you through that experience?
In terms of the consequences that came from that experience, I would say that as a young teen who is pursuing what was defined as success prior to the experience, your expectations before something like that happens are completely different than when something like that happens to you. As a youngster, when you have something that is catastrophic that happens to you, if you're somewhat intelligent as a youngster, you would realize, hey, something catastrophic happened and maybe I should like adjust my course of path. And for me, I would say that it really pushed me away from the average person.
Sure.
And it made me look at myself as kind of an outsider, right? Around your friends. No one has experienced what I'm experiencing. So you start to have these thoughts and you start to like really like outcast yourself. And I would say that I did that for years. I remember after mom's cancer, I was about sophomore in high school. And about my sophomore year of high school, I really started to see myself as an outsider. I remember spending time not with kids in the high school. I remember spending time in the coach's classroom at lunch. And then ultimately I ended up leaving the high school and going to another high school to swim at a swim program. And I remember just always feeling like an outsider in terms of the community that I was originally built in, because people knew the Dickens brothers, the Dickens kids, as Mark Dickens's kids, our dad's kids. The Dickens family, in terms of Mila and Mark's kids, were Soren and Erickson, and that was not the thing anymore.
Right.
It was Mila, which I would assume people would see her as this like widow in society, and Erickson and Soren as these like broken kids. We're statistics. Like the fact that you and I didn't end up in prison is a statistic, considering that most kids who grew up in a household without a father and even without a mother as supervision during their teen years it's really a miracle. And looking back on it, like, were there close calls? Maybe, but like regardless, we didn't really deviate from, not that I'm going to call them expectations, but really from the mission. And the mission,
we stayed the course.
And the mission was success. Like whatever we wanted as kids was success, and what we want now is success. And we battled through a lot of adversity along the way, but ultimately we got there. I would say that we got there through confining ourselves to us. We removed ourselves from society. We spent years, at least I did, I spent years removed from the social norms. When I went to college, I didn't drink, I didn't party, I stayed away from all of the things that were normal. Everything that was happening in society, I rejected because I felt like I didn't belong there. Why? Because I spent the last 4 or 5 years feeling I didn't belong because I didn't have the same upbringing. I didn't have the same experience that everyone else was having in high school. So yeah, was I an outsider? Yeah, I felt like a complete outsider the whole time.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I definitely can relate to that in a lot of ways as well, because things, after you experience kind of what we did, there's a lot of trivial things, a lot of things just seem petty, things that people would get upset about or they'd be sad about. You're like, all right, really? Like this is what's going to ruin your day, that kind of thing. Like, buck up, and that's sounds a little bit harsh, and I get it. Everybody deals with things differently, but at a young age, I definitely felt like an outlier too, just because I couldn't relate to a lot of the stuff people would be talking about, the drama, getting all worked up about certain things. But I'm like, man, I guess we just kind of grew up a lot quicker. That's what I would say, is we had to grow up very quickly. There's pros and cons to that for sure. It made us wise at a young age, but then again, it made us feel like we didn't really quite fit in a lot of ways, I guess you can say. which is unfortunate. One thing I will say too, for sure, we just mentioned how we kind of stay the course regardless of all this trauma. And I got to give credit to my mom as well, just because of the way she did raise us. She was the CEO of a company of 300 employees. For 30 years, she busted her ass, built a company pretty much on her own from the ground up. And she definitely installed that drive in us as well, working hard, building that momentum. And even when she was sick for a while, she was still functioning the best she could as the CEO of her company. And I think that definitely brushed off on us. And we saw that strength. We saw her ability to maintain face the best she could despite the odds that were stacked against her.
Yeah, I think that the adversity that we experience in terms of what we dealt with from a family dynamic was, one, we experienced extreme adversity when it came to developing the stereotypical family in America.
Yeah, societal norms went out the window for us at a very young age. Like expectations in terms of society, this is how you act in this situation, this is what you should do here. And at that point, I remember just like, why? We could be dead tomorrow. Who cares?
Mm-hmm. I feel that now too. And
oh, sure.
I think that I have a really hard time grasping a lot of people's expectations when it comes to their career. And of course, I'm very hungry when it comes to my career, but I'm also very realistic when it comes to expectations and also the outcomes that you may encounter along the way. And with that being said, I feel that with a lot of the things that I've experienced when it comes to our own situation here as creators, you never know what's going to come. And I'm so loosey-goosey. Like, for example, I've taken over 200 flights in the last 2 years, flying all over the place, producing projects. I would say at least 30 to 40 times at this point, I've had flight delays. They don't even bother me. I've been thrown into tornado shelters. Mm-hmm. I've had flights diverted 3,000 miles away. I don't care. Nothing bothers me. Mm-hmm. And I really don't think that anything could come into my sphere that would alter my view of just keep going, keep going. It's like, all right, cool.
It's resiliency. It cultivated a lot of resiliency. I don't believe that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. There's that cliche that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I believe what doesn't kill you makes you sad, angry, and it makes you perceive things different. But it's how you channel that sadness and that anger and that different perception. That's what makes the difference. And we were able to kind of channel it in a way that did build that resiliency and did keep us on a course. And that's why I wish that there was more, especially in our society, more education or guidance for people in similar situations that we were in, especially as young kids, that can help, because you see it time and time again. You see the kids who have so much potential. They fall through the cracks because of trauma that they experience as a kid. It's sad because that's a lot of wasted potential, and it's not necessarily even their fault because they experience these things and they maybe didn't have a guide or two, or they didn't have the resources or the knowledge to like keep them on their feet a little bit, or they didn't have the grooming they did as a kid to build that kind of resiliency. And it's that they become a statistic in that way. Trauma like that, like you said, like statistics, I think you lose a parent as a kid, the chances of you ending up in jail are much higher, divorce rates are much higher, substance abuse issues are much higher, and difficulty maintaining employment. Those are the main four that hit you really hard later in life if you lost a parent as a kid. And luckily, for the most part, we've done a pretty good job at dodging those.
I think that in terms of dodging those, as society would, label those things as being negative, a lot of the times people who do experience loss or experience the traumas that we experience, they may face those adversities along the way. And ultimately, that isn't the end for you.
No, for sure. Yeah, that's not.
And I would say that when you do experience what we experience in terms of loss or the adversity along the way, you're put in a position where when you make it through, you're going to be in a position to succeed faster and stronger than your peers. And that's because you're going to have a piece of life that no one else has experienced. And that's really what's going to give you the edge. You're either going to make it through or you're going to fall flat on your face. And if you fall flat on your face, someone's going to be there to pick you up. And really, that's what this whole episode's all about. We want to connect with people who might be in a similar position where, hey, you've experienced a lot of as a youngster. The reality is you have two options. you can either let that destroy you, or you can take that and then turn it into a secret weapon and harness it to become a superpower and become something great from that.
Right.
And that was a really good reel.
Yeah. A good soundbite.
A little soundbite.
Yeah.
That's all I have of me right now.
I mean, I remember too, like just back then when all that was going down with dad and mom, I remember personally for me, that's when I really started to kind of embrace my creativity a little bit. Like I can trace some of the stuff that came out later in certain projects I started thinking about back then. And I think that was because we were going through such an unstable time. And that's kind of what I latched onto aside from baseball, was kind of honing in on my writing. And that was one thing at the time. And I remember back then, my novel that I wrote, I started writing it when I was 17. And back then, that's when I started kind of laying the foundation for it, like planting the seeds for what eventually came. And I look back on it now, it's like the novel's called The Orchard's Offspring. The setting is an orchard, basically. And I remember spending so much time at my aunt's house during that time because we'd have to stay there when mom and dad were at UCSF for doctor's appointments and whatnot. We stayed a lot at my aunt's house, and she lives amongst a bunch of orchards. And we spent a lot of time in the orchards, biking around, whatever we were doing. And I know that's kind of where that spark started. And I started thinking about that. And then I eventually created characters where they kind of came from a family dynamic that in a lot of ways symbolized ours at the time. So, that is, I guess, one positive thing that you can say came out of that situation, where that is when I started to really cultivate kind of my creativity, my imagination. It started to really flow. And again, it was a painful time, but I chose to kind of use an adaptive coping mechanism for that. And so the creative juices started flowing more. That's art in a lot of ways, channeling that pain into something beautiful, something worthwhile, something that you can look back on later in life and be like, I turned a bad situation into something kind of cool,
Being a creator is oftentimes more than painting a picture or creating a song or making a video. Oftentimes, being a creator is really just taking an experience and facing it head on and creating an experience for really the creator. If you think about it, whatever created us, whatever is driving us at the core, whatever we can't even comprehend as a creator, you're there to experience every single experience that you're thrown for the creator. And as someone who's living in this three-dimensional realm, you're creating these experiences for something greater than you to experience. So whether it's adversity or it's sadness or it's success, you're going to be creating this experience that the inner creator inside of you is experiencing. And I think that regardless of what we experienced through our teenage years, looking back on it, I would say, if you want to keep it optimistic, the only good that came from it was you and me and our creator are the only ones that experienced anything good from those times. And that was, one, for us experience, and two, for our creator perspective. Because other than that, from the outside, none of that shit was good.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then touching on that, what you just said too, it trickles down. It trickles down to the people that we've been able to impact or affect from our creations. The experiences that we took, channeled them into creating, and then people have been able to, benefit from our creations, whether that's a sentimental benefit, whether that's a monetary benefit, whatever it might be. We have been able to touch the lives of other people, fortunately, based off of those creations that originally stemmed from a lot of that trauma that we went through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think about that sometimes. Yeah, I remember when we made the documentary on Dad's life, not only his life, but our travel baseball team that he coached for so many years as kids. That's one of those prime examples of channeling pain and kind of working through that, processing that in a creative realm, because I think creativity is such a great tool to harness, to work through grief, to work through pain, whether that's filmmaking or writing, art, whatever it might be. It's such a valuable and underestimated tool when it comes to be able to work through stuff. I mean, I know art therapy is huge right now in psychology and therapy, because it allows people to kind of access a different side of their brain. It allows people to see things in a different way and process things different. And I don't know about you, but when we made the documentary on Dad, it was kind of a cathartic experience, when it all came together. It felt very cathartic. It felt like there was some type of release. And I think that is what art, regardless of the medium, really allows the artist. It gives them that cathartic release in a lot of different ways. That's why art's so cool. That's why it's been around for as long as it has been. You look at famous artists in the past, a lot of them had, they had their issues. They had their very flawed characters in a lot of ways. They had skeletons in the closet, whatever it might be. But you know what? They create things that are timeless. They're shared. They're things that people are able to learn from. They're things that people can reflect on and then learn more about themselves. Our art is a very valuable tool for people in society in general.
This is why creators are the most powerful living creatures in this three-dimensional realm. It's because creators have the power to take experiences, convert them into receptive messaging, convey that messaging to an audience
in a digestible way,
and have that audience react to take action.
Emotionally too, most of the time.
Yes, exactly. And what we're living in these days with high frequency messaging and high frequency storytelling being pushed towards us, we as creators, we as living beings need to be aware of the messaging that's being thrown towards us and understand which messaging aligns with the expectations we have for ourselves. What expectations do we have in this life? What do we want out of this life? And with that high frequency messaging being thrown at us constantly, we really do get to decide, do we want to choose the positive path? Do we want to just get completely drowned in the negative narratives? Do we want to become who we thought we were going to be as a 7-year-old kid? You can be that person. You really can be. You just have to decide what narrative you want to embody. And I think as a creator, you really do have the choice. Not only do you have the choice for yourself, but more importantly, you have the choice to push a narrative towards other people.
That's powerful.
And that's really powerful. And I think for you and I particularly, we could have taken what we experienced and turned it into complete negative. And we didn't. We took that and we found the most positive and optimistic future for ourselves as we could have. And that's what we're doing now. And ultimately, anyone who may experience anything close to what we experience, they have the same opportunity to become something to pass on the experience to the next generation. And when I look back in 10, 15 years from now, nothing's going to change. It's just going to be, how do I view that experience? And then how do I communicate that experience to the next generation?
Yeah, well said. I agree. Challenges, man. I mean, that's kind of what defines us all. And going back to it, sometimes, a lot of the time, it's not the actual event. Like, as horrible as Dad dying was, it really came down to more so the actions taken after that. The barriers that were put in place to kind of curb those repercussions. Reacting to the event, I think, is what really can lead to two roads, the good road, the bad road. Yeah, so I hope whoever is listening to this, regardless of what you're going through, the pain, hardships, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. And regardless of what you're dealt with, there's always hope. And you can always take what you have and create something powerful and something beautiful with it. Yeah, use our story as an example for motivation or whatever you want to call it. And I hope just us being kind of vulnerable right now and talking about our lives, because that's something we don't do very often. We don't even people really close to us, I would say, our friends and stuff.
Absolutely.
Very few actually probably really know the ins and outs of our story in depth. Probably 2 or 3 people in my life truly really kind of know the ins and outs of it, I would say. I do hope whoever's listening just kind of realizes that a lot of good can come out of dark places if you just stay the course.
That's a fact. Well, thank you guys for tuning into the Scaling Creator podcast, episode 2. Erickson and I just did a little bit of a deep dive into our past, some of the experiences that we've had. We look forward to chatting a little bit more in the next episode about how we became creators and what drove us to build a massive video production agency that services clients across the United States. Thank you so much, and tune in for the next episode.